So for our keynote speaker, we'll have Juan Benet from IPFS and Filecoin fame. And if you're ready, Juan, if you could join the stage, please. Hey, dude.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Let me share my screen. Hey, super excited to be here speaking to everybody today. Really, thrilled to be part of the conference. It's been really awesome to hear a ton of the discussions so far. Really, it's been a great swath of kind of like a snapshot of the whole Web3 space. So it's been great to see so many different members from so many different communities come together and talk about all of the amazing things that are happening across the space. This has been a fantastic year for Web3, right? So I think it goes without saying just how much growth we've seen on all kinds of things, everything from deep tech improvements that a lot of people thought were impossible and or extremely far away, getting delivered this year by a lot of different groups, starting to really show the power of economic primitives from Web3 going into communities outside of building tech. So all of the amazing, like the rise of NFTs in art especially has been amazing to see, and great to see like so many communities adopt these different economic flows. There's a lot of really exciting and potential primitives there of building new creator economies that just have a different sort of like economic production model, and that's been super amazing. Also, like the rise of DAOs this year has been amazing to see, just in terms of tons of people. Like I think tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of people now participating in a lot of kind of Web3 enabled communities, and that's it. Spells that's like really an amazing year to be just sort of witnessing this this diffusion of all of the tech that so many people have been working on for, I don't know, 8+ years, 12 years in some cases. You're kind of getting to this point. So it's been a long time coming. Really awesome year. And so I wanted to kind of spend a little bit of time reflecting and looking ahead to next year, at least from a corner, one of the corners of Web3. I've spent a bit of time thinking about kind of data storage and where that's headed, and how people will be using computation over it. So I'll spend a bit of time talking about that. And then I wanted to talk a bit about funding structures for projects. I think one of the key components and contributions of the whole Web3 space is just changing the way that that different different economic models and different economic production systems work around different pieces. And so one of the key things that's happening in the crypto and Web3 space is starting to build dramatically better economic structures for funding public goods. And so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that, because I think it's one of the most promising things that can come out of Web3. And I kind of want to give a glimpse to kind of what might be possible. And yeah, so great. Let's dive in. I wanted to kind of start with talking a little bit about IPFS. A lot of us have been super focused on talking about Filecoin, because that's kind of where we're spending a ton of our time and energy and focus on. But I wanted to kind of just give a little bit of like an awesome plug for just how powerful the primitives ended up being here, around kind of how CADs work and how being able to address any kind of object in this content address way, being able to kind of serve it from anywhere, being able to like repair it and so on. We've seen so many things this year happen where the power of decentralization and the power of being able to address any information from any node and serve it from anybody has been brought to bear. There's been many cases where NFT collections, it started at the beginning of the year with many like rug pulls and so on, and many communities kind of like got wise to that and started doing content addressing for everything, and prevented all of that flow. And then even kind of like entire platforms shutting down. But then all of the creators just all of the NFTs pointing to all of the content with content address links with the CIDs, we're able to just still serve everything and kind of have business as usual with a completely different group of people running either the same software and in some cases completely different software powering all the same assets. So that's been just awesome to see that like the primitives are working, the systems are working, and all this stuff is really kind of building a dramatically more resilient network. so for me, who's been kind of pushing on this for many years, has been just phenomenal to see that kind of thing work. Um, it made me reflect and go back to kind of this IPFS roadmap that is part of the IPFS repo. There's a ton of like really amazing um, possibilities and kind of directions that the IPFS project could go in. There's a lot of kind of different threads, and they pull on different kinds of use cases and different kinds of communities and different kinds of goals. So it's worth like kind of like revisiting a lot of this stuff, and also thinking about how the public funding primitives that I'm going to talk about a little bit later in the talk, can be applied to fulfilling a lot of the promise here, and a lot of the potential visions for the future here. So definitely encourage you to, if you're interested in IPFS and interested in data distribution and how we address information and so on, go to this roadmap and like poke around in those different descriptions. These were written quite a while ago, I think like a few years ago. But there's a lot of stuff there that like has yet to come to pass. Like for example, I want to make it so you can have fully functioning web apps working across planets, and that we still need to get all the tooling working well enough to actually make IPFS interplanetary. But and so there's varying degrees of distance there, but there's a lot of like really promising things. And so if you're kind of interested in any of these things, like definitely participate on GitHub or in the different chat streams and whatnot. And if you think there's some stuff there that like you would like to do and you think it would be really awesome to work on, but you like funding or lack a team to go work on it and so on, definitely keep me and other people in the IPFS project posted, because we can start using some of the kind of the DAO funding primitives and the other kind of retroactive public funding structures and grant structures and so on to help people kind of get started with these kinds of things. It was cool to reflect on just kind of the browser upgrade path. When I started IPFS, people told me that I'd never succeed in convincing any browser to like actually adopt the protocol, and like that it was never going to happen and so on, or that it would take 20, 30 years. It's been really great to see that like we're actually way ahead of schedule, and we're now finally kind of getting integrated directly into browsers, which is fantastic. We're not going as fast into kind of the OS upgrade path. It would be really amazing to now have kind of OS level services directly in shipped test packages and whatnot that like work super well. And so we need to kind of work on this part, and certainly mobile. Mobile needs to be like a much bigger focus for a lot of people. So this is most of the interactions that humans have with the internet is kind of all kind of mobile oriented. And while of course you can do all of the reads through gateways and whatnot, and like that sort of works, it'd be really awesome to have like fully functioning peer-to-peer directly in mobile, and have the kind of experience where like people in a room can interact with each other phone to phone without having to go through a server somewhere. Major shout out to a ton of people and different groups that worked on realizing all this. So awesome stuff. So turning actually to Filecoin for a bit, this year has been just amazing. Like this has been the first year of the Filecoin network being live. A ton of people have been working towards this for a long time. We finally have the primitives to be able to create a massive scale decentralized storage network, and that's something that again, when we started the Filecoin project, like people said, there's no way you're going to get a proper scale decentralized storage network to actually compete with the cloud. The cloud is massive. Like we're talking about hundreds of petabytes, exabytes, getting to zettabytes of use of data storage and so on. And like there's no way you're going to be able to coordinate like tons of people around the planet to actually provide a high quality service at that level of scale. And it's just amazing to see the network grow so quickly to now I think 13 exabytes of capacity in the network, which is totally absurd. Like this is where it took the cloud decade and a half to get to that. And of course, like Moore's law and so on, catching up is always easier, but it's still kind of absurd that like that level of capacity and a system of that magnitude was able to get scaled that quickly. And so that's the power of Web3 and the power of incentive structures and the power of mechanism design and blockchain networks. It's like that you can create marketplaces and create economies that can cause that to happen extremely quickly. And so like that's what's been really amazing to see and super promising. Filecoin is a very large network, and so there's a lot of different parts that go into building something like this. Is like any blockchain network, there's many different components and so on. One sort of reflection, just like the then and now of like the last year, kind of looking at mainnet liftoff, and these figures are a little bit outdated, about a month or so. But sort of like looking at where Filecoin was at mainnet and where it is now, like massive storage capacity increase. We shipped a ton of upgrades to make the chain have dramatically more bandwidth to be able to onboard a lot more storage. Greatly increase the network security by having multiple implementations on mainnet. Getting to many upgrades and improvements that were shipped by a lot of participants in the community, which was really awesome to see, kind of a proper upgrade process working in a network. It's been also really awesome to see the storage cost and availability just drive the price of storage down, right? Like, so the curve economics of Filecoin enable just super cheap storage on a network like this, and so it's been awesome to see like that actually work for large scales of data, which is great. Also, going from the beginning of the year to now, like there's been a ton of improvement in all the different kind of developer onboarding pathways for how to add storage into the network, how to weave it into applications, how to use it for NFTs, use it for a whole bunch of different use cases, and so a host of like different developer tools and systems got built along the way. There's also a ton of cross-chain integration. So now there's many bridges and other systems connecting Filecoin to the other blockchain networks and making it super easy to store data from those and then to use the data in those systems. So a lot of that is kind of bridges and oracles right now. In the future, I think it'll be just totally cross-chain interactions that are kind of just direct messages from one chain to another. Also, awesome to see like tons of applications and tools being built, massive momentum with tons of developers, projects, organizations, and also a ton of startups being formed. I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. And also really cool to see just useful storage scaling super fast, right? So we're in the scale of millions of deals now, 30 petabytes of storage, which is by far the largest decentralized storage network ever in terms of like usage capacity, many orders of magnitude larger than anything else out there. And again, this figures just in the last month we've had now I think 10 million more NFTs. So that's growing super fast, and so that's pretty awesome to see. Cool. So I want to talk a little bit about enabling new startups. So one of the big things that happened over the last year is a number of us kind of worked on creating this sort of like builder's funnel that can help developers learn, build, and launch new applications and new systems, and then grow them over time. And so that starts at the beginning with a whole set of developer resources, and it's a ton of different pieces that go into it to help people get started, help people play around with the tech, help people kind of envision some potential application and some potential superpower they want to ship to the world, and then how to translate that into an actual product that they can ship to the world. And then we really leaned into hackathons as a way to enable people to have an opportunity to have the time and focus and attention from a set of people to actually work on those things. And so we worked with a whole number of many different partners to have a ton of hackathons throughout the year, so that people could have a really great venue to kind of try out building things. And it's been amazing to see like what people have been building over time. Like there's been I think thousands of projects this year, and many of them have sort of gone on to become like the full-time focus for those builders. Many of them have turned into whole production level projects by now. Many of them have turned into startups or public funded oriented organizations. We need like better names for that. Some of them have turned into DAOs and so on. So it's been really great to see like this whole funding funnel, including kind of like ecosystem investors and other kind of funding groups. I should add grants here. So like there's investments and grants for the different kind of types of funding, but all of that is sort of available in this funnel. It's been really great to see that working. So there's been a ton of developer activity, a lot of hackathons, and it's been great to be able to see people developing, building awesome things, shipping them, and then growing those projects. And many have gone into accelerators and graduated from those, and so on. And there's another one. I think there's I don't know when the next application is, but it's I think relatively soon. I think it might be Techstars. I'm not 100% sure, but if you're interested in this and you're working on a project and you want to get accelerator support, definitely reach out or look at the there's some website I think that has a lot of this info. Here's a snapshot of some of the groups that built whole projects in this last year, just through the builders funnel. So things like Valist, where that are securely distributing software artifacts, so like builds and releases for software, all connected to blockchains and so on, and distributed peer-to-peer with IPFS and back to the Filecoin and so on. Things like Mintgate that can token gate access to things using NFTs. Things like Huddle that enable peer-to-peer video meetings and then record things and back them up into Filecoin, like take all the recordings and store them there, or actually integrate NFT backgrounds and NFT avatars. I think like that's what they're working on now. And this started like a year ago, like in the last year they've grown a ton. Some other ones that are started more recently, in the last 6 months or so. Mona started building a whole bunch of spaces where the space that itself, like the room itself, is an NFT, and so you can think of now enabling a lot of artists and creators to build extremely high quality environments and put in craft amazing experiences and turn that into the actual NFT product. And then you can think of wiring up those spaces together with portals, or be able to place NFTs in there. Or now I think they just shipped multiplayer, so now you can drop a link to a room and go hang out there and be with other people and have audio and everything. So that's building the metaverse in kind of like a digital first sort of way. And you don't need to fit everything in a Euclidean space or anything. Then there's projects like WeatherXM, where they're building a blockchain-powered weather network, weather station system, where you can have an economy and incentivized network for putting weather stations all over the world. And that's also been awesome to see. And all the different kind of data feeds that are going to be that's going to kind of become available over the next year. And you're going to be able to kind of write systems and applications with blockchain economy type primitives directly on weather. So that's going to enable all kinds of things like insurance contracts and so on, and kind of all different kinds of planning and so on. And then there's tons of tooling and systems built for the whole Filecoin economy. So things like tools for builders and tools for clients. There's a ton of business opportunities there for a lot of groups to solve really key challenges for people in the market. So it's been awesome to see a lot of the tech being built there. So those are just a small snapshot of a ton of projects that have been built over the last year, and many more to come. So that this whole funnel is growing a lot, and so I expect next year we're going to have even more ecosystem, a larger scale of ecosystem projects building. And so kudos to all the builders out there that built amazing things this year, and so many of us are here to support you. So whenever you run into any challenges and whatnot, definitely lean on us. So I wanted to touch a little bit on public goods funding, and I'm going to unfortunately have to go really fast through this, not do it justice, but the good news is that we ran a whole event about funding the commons recently. So I think it's fundingthecommons.io, I think is the website. You can search for it and so on. And we got a really awesome set of speakers to come and talk to us about different ways of funding projects and funding communities and funding systems that take into account kind of this modern network-oriented view of the production, and so where you can start thinking about retroactive systems or different kinds of ways to fund the production of public goods as opposed to just private goods. One of the key principles here is participatopia. So this is a concept that comes from Eric Drexler. This is the kind of one of the things that I think the Web3 community has really understood in a way that the rest of the world hasn't understood, which is that the science and technology enable us to greatly increase the value in the world by orders of magnitude. And so when you're in that realm, it does not at all make sense to kind of compete or look at the world in any kind of zero-sum way. It's just dramatically better to be working together to just scale the what we can do and scale the reach of science and technology to just greatly increase the value in the world. And so it'd be great to kind of align everybody to hit Paratopia as fast as we can. I'm super interested in enabling that by helping to close the innovation, what I'm sort of describing as the innovation chasm, which is that today there's a massive market for kind of building products and shipping them out into the world, and some fraction of that goes into technology development, and that's usually sort of primarily led by corporations. And there's very robust incentive field and production model there, and tons of economic structures and support structures for doing that and kind of productizing technology. And then on the other side, there's a ton of incentives and structures for the pursuit of knowledge and for the discovery of new knowledge and so on. Like this is the entire science side, and which is primarily led by academia. And the incentive there is not market oriented, or at least not money market oriented. There's sort of a market and incentive structure around recognition and trying to get into like the impact of certain kinds of discoveries and so on. And definitely like the worldwide market for corporations, it has many orders of magnitude more funding than science, and so we need to drive a lot more funding towards science to greatly expand what we know and increase the reach of what we know. But that's not what the bottleneck is. I think the real bottleneck is in the translation of the science to technology. So this part of going from ideas and extending what we know and turning it into technology that we can use and that we can expand our capabilities with, like that's where the really bad bottleneck is. And so I'm increasingly interested in working on structures and techniques that can greatly accelerate this, that can make sure that we have really good and effective coordination systems to make the translation of science and technology happen. And so I think like when you look around the world and you feel like there's like some deep problems where certainly humanity has by now sort of figured out how to solve some of those problems, and it's kind of unclear why it hasn't the solutions haven't really diffused into the world and so on. Often the problem is that we do know how to maybe solve the problem in principle, but we haven't done all of the really tough R&D work that goes from building a concept all the way to producing technology that can meet the needs of the world and can be mass produced or delivered in large scales to people around the world and be woven into a product. So this closing the innovation chasm, I think, is one of the most important things to work on. And so we're trying to think about this in terms of learning the lessons from the startup investment funding landscape that has worked so well for the last 20 years, and see if we can create structures like that for public goods funding and for network funding, or public goods or club goods and those kinds of enable networks to build broadly accessible tools. So think of a Paratopian type of structure where you're just creating technology and growing the value for everybody. And so I think it is definitely possible to create a funding structure that can mirror, really rival the corporate world, but oriented around networks building public goods. And so I think this let's learn what we can from those markets and learn what we can about those systems, and then build dramatically better funding structures. I tend to think about it as kind of these funding staircases where the startup world has become extremely good at kind of refining this whole network oriented funding structure for all the different stages. And that's kind of really skewed in the public goods oriented part of the landscape. The large funders are primarily nation states, and they have very few funding agencies, and it's not as much of a network. And it's sort of when you kind of analyze this whole funnel, it's super lopsided. There's a ton of funding at the beginning, so it's really easy to get started, but then there's this Death Valley in the middle, and then there's some large funding in the later parts, but it's coming from very this is very difficult to do anything outside of what they all think you should be doing. So I think the power of Web3 will be really felt once we can do kind of the whole end-to-end thing of develop new science, do all of the R&D that we need to do, and then productize it and distribute it all the way into the world. And I think that things like DAOs and things like public funding mechanisms, all of this kind of retroactive public good funding stuff can really help with this. And I think if we do that, then we can get to a much better world. So I think a lot of us will be working on this kind of stuff in the intervening time. And one of the cool things that we can do to put in use some of these ideas is to use all of this network funding to create structures to fund the technology we're developing now. So things like all of the different software and R&D work that we need to do, like create network funding structures to fund all of that. A plug that we are hiring for people that are interested in this public goods funding stuff. So definitely, if you're interested in working in this, reach out. And I wanted to kind of end with some ideas for what might you work on or build, or what's going on and what's happening that you might either want to get involved in, or might want to create a new project and kind of get some public funding for. And so I'll give a snapshot of a few things to think about. One is hey, there's a ton of storage providers around the world already in the Filecoin network, and that's awesome, and it's really massive. But it's not well distributed around the world, so it would be great to create structures to enable a lot more storage providers all around the world to bring storage and in there and so on. The client usage is scaling, and a lot of it's very clear from the work this year that tools that tune for specific use case end up doing extremely well and enable a lot of groups to onboard a ton of storage and make it super useful for that use case. So we just need more of those kinds of tools tuned for different use cases. So there's a ton of them already, but a lot of these are going to tune to specific use cases. So looking at across the use case set and looking at things that are empty or something like that, and kind of working on those might be super useful and super valuable. Creating more connections to other chains and other networks, and enabling the stuff that's going on in those networks to then connect to the storage primitives from Filecoin and vice versa, I think would be extremely useful. Then making it easier to onboard massive scale. So we have a ton of capacity. Let's fill it and use it to store super critical, valuable data for the world. So really helping build tooling to onboard hundreds of petabytes or exabytes of storage, I think would be is sort of what's needed, right? We have this amazing resource and amazing capacity. Let's put it to extremely good use and store super valuable stuff there. Then a huge plug to ChainSafe files, because really making consumer storage products that enable everyday users and consumers to be able to use all of this tech is super key. So it's been really awesome to see that you can now have a Dropbox style service, all Web3 powered, all Web3 enabled, and that's fantastic. This is stuff that 8 years ago seemed completely super far away and really difficult to do, and it's awesome to see that happening now. I think video is one of the really key things. Most of the traffic on the internet is all video. It's just people consuming and viewing tons of video. So working on this part, building more applications that use all the tools that have been built so far, things like the transcoding networks and the storage networks and the distribution networks and so on, to deliver tons of new kinds of video would be extremely useful. Then I think one of the things is storing developer artifacts on IPFS and Filecoin, being able to kind of take all of the package managers or all of VM registries or things like container registries and so on, and store and distribute all of that with Web3 tooling. It's going to be a while until all of that is super fast and super sleek and excellent experience, but all of the hard problems in terms of the cryptography and the distribution model and so on are solved. Now we have to work on making really nice tools and make it higher quality and faster than alternatives. Then kind of let's connect all the chains together and enable cross-chain computation and cross-chain storage and all of that kind of stuff. Let's enable retrieval markets to be able to kind of have the CDN style use case where you can drop an IPFS hash and say, I want this backed up in all these specific regions, and I want to deliver with this low latency, and so have all of that replicated around the world would be really awesome. Then again, storage providing is a huge endeavor to run a data center and so on. So making that super much easier with technical improvements underneath the hood, in the crypto or even in kind of the economic flows, finding better structures for the economic transactions related to becoming a storage provider, I think would be super useful. One of the big goals is to make Filecoin green and make the whole network just environmentally positive. So this is something that has become a huge topic in Web3, which is awesome. I think we can, I personally think, and I think a lot of people in the Filecoin network think that Web3 needs to lead the way to create a verifiably green and environmentally positive outcome in the world. And what's really cool about our tech is that we can create verifiable structures for this, and then we can use economic primitives to, cause massive, large-scale action from groups. Like, you don't have to get agreement from nation states or convince everybody. You can just start doing it. And so I think that we could drag the entire, if we get this right with Filecoin, we can drag the entire blockchain ecosystem into becoming environmentally positive, and like that would be amazing. It would be a super fantastic outcome. There's a whole conference that was dedicated to thinking about this, and so you can look into the different projects that are going on in this if you're interested. Yes, there's a whole bunch of other things that you can spend a ton of time talking. Given timing, I'll just rush through. Would love to kind of make the whole economy much more self-reliant, be able to kind of transact in everything, all of the production parts of the storage and so on directly in Filecoin. I think that would make the whole network more stronger. And one of the big things that's coming next year is being able to have different kinds of computation around the network. So you can think of like storage as one layer. You can think of computation over the state as another layer, which is kind of all the on-chain computations that then can coordinate other layers of computation. And kind of the layer above that is, how do you run arbitrary computing jobs over all the data, right? So you've stored petabytes of stuff. Now what? Like, now you want to run computing over that, and you want to run a bunch of computation over that data to make it like really useful. How do you do that? And so this is where I think a lot of the projects that are going to be shipped or get started in some cases next year are going to be all about this. And so getting to kind of a large scale, high performance, private, and high integrity, decentralized computing cloud over the storage is kind of like where all this is headed. And Web3 has to scale massively together, right? So like, we're very far away from being able to compete with the cloud in this regard, but I think we're getting the primitives together. And this is sort of like the picture of the scale. Like, we have to dramatically increase the throughput of all these chains and make it be able to kind of issue computation jobs that are verifiable in massive scale. And the whole NFT world has been awesome to see, as I was mentioning earlier. Amazing rise of the whole creator economy. I think new types of media are going to really help. So again, making whole video NFTs, where like the actual movies themselves could be, it'd be amazing to see kind of the production of feature-length films be entirely Web3 powered, right? Like, change the movie industry to use Web3 primitives and reward people better. I think that's like achievable now. The tech is there. We just need the economic primitives and some really great example projects. And then there's other kinds of media. So like the metaverse stuff can come from these rooms being built, and then you start kind of interacting in those rooms, and then you wire those rooms together. Then you start interacting, have program games and program other experiences in those rooms. And so one of the things that I'm really excited about is kind of like the programmability of all these spaces and what happens when you connect them. And kind of like those get wired up into larger spaces and virtual worlds and so on. So it'd be really, really cool to see all of this stuff and all this kind of computation in these spaces. So yeah, I think we can build a metaverse. We probably need a better name now that Facebook has been trying to like co-opt the name and screw everything. But we should try to like potentially find a new name, or like take the name back or something. But I think this is going to be a hugely impactful piece of humanity for the next 10, 15 years. And I think it's really, really important that this is all kind of Web3 powered with Web3 values, Web3 principles. And it really is going to depend on the next 2 years of work. So I think in the next 2 years of work, we can get some like really high quality primitives here. Then all the applications built out over the next 3 to 5 years will spell like a really, really positive future. So definitely work on all this. Cool. I'm gonna stop there. Lots of stuff going on, lots of support for lots of different groups. If you're interested in building stuff, like reach out. And everybody's hiring. So everybody around the whole Web3 space is growing and hiring and whatnot. So if you're interested in this space and I'm working on it full time, definitely reach out. Cool. I'm gonna stop there.
Well, thank you, Juan. That was a great presentation. Learned a ton there. We will get into the question and answers. And is Juan still there? Okay. Oh, there you are. Okay.
Sorry about that. Page refresh.
Okay, we have some questions here. The first one, how will Filecoin comply with a GDPR, for example?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the short answer is kind of like in the same ways that the normal cloud systems comply. It's just kind of in a more, it's just in a different pathway. So at the end of the day, people and organizations are hosting things, and you have many different kinds of systems and protocols that enable compliance with those rules. So it really varies by jurisdiction. But for example, GDPR and so on like enables you to have like a standard process by which you kind of like think and reason about what information needs to be hosted where. So if an application requires information to be hosted within some specific nation state boundaries, you can model that in Filecoin. An application can say, oh, we need to hire these specific storage providers in this specific regions to comply with that. In other cases, it's about kind of like deletion and so on, and you can enable that as a client. Like you want to enable clients and storage providers to fulfill all the local structures and local regulations, and enable like really a market of jurisdictions that have different decisions about how software needs to be built, right? So this is a very difficult kind of question. Like you don't want a structure that applies one same principle everywhere. You want a flexible structure that enables experimentation with different things and see what works better, and enable participants to move between those regimes to enter the kind of transaction environment that they want to be a part of, right? And so at the end of the day, protocols need to our tools and systems and so on, and they need to kind of disallow certain kinds of things like they provide integrity checking and distribution and so on. But there's a lot of stuff that needs to be up to the individual users, like the clients or the source providers, to decide what to do about. And that's kind of where how you can basically encounter those arrangements and decisions and so on. The protocol is flexible enough to enable you to do that.
Next question from Dan Forbes. To what do you attribute the faster than anticipated adoption by browsers?
Really, I think so. It's a combination of things. So one is, a ton of hard work from a number of people in doing this. So like, there's a ton of tools that had to be built, a ton of coordination across organizations to make happen. There's a browsers working group who was like, huge shout out to Dietrich in FPL, who has been working on this for years now, and like really achieved like massive success there, working with browser vendors to get there. The second thing is like browser vendors who see the future, who are not afraid to try new things and change structures. So big shout out to Brave and Opera here. They've been leading the charge on all of the Web3 oriented stuff. So both adding IPFS and adding things like ENS and so on. So like that's been fantastic to see. And also new browsers, so things like Puma and others who've been like experimenting with new kinds of structures and kind of Web3 native oriented browsers. And so that's been, I think, like the big key. It'll be a while, I think, until things like Chrome and Safari and IE or whatever, all the kind of successors. Forgot what the name of the successor to IE is, but it'll be a while until all of those adopt this tech. But I think if we create an environment where people are switching to Brave and switching to Opera and switching to these other browsers because they're better and they understand Web3, then that'll create massive pressure for those Web2 browsers to really adapt and enable
Web3. Next question from Sean Ryan. What skill sets do you look for when hiring for research roles?
A ton of skill sets. So everything from approach to like doing good, like strong structured research. Like how do you approach the research questions themselves? What the research product is like? How do you navigate the conceptual landscape? How do you then produce results in terms of the actual knowledge generated along the way, and how the knowledge is usable and consumable by other groups building things. So research is part of like a large integrated system of like coming up with new ideas, studying those ideas, coming up with like the theory and practice of those ideas, and then how to weave those ideas into some systems, and kind of like actually do something with them. So it's there's a lot that goes into all of that. So yeah, this is could probably give a whole talk about this. But there's probably a bunch of resources on the web, both written and in video, that talk about what great research looks like, and some probably would differ to those.
Another question from Dan. How do you envision, for instance, a movie as an NFT working? Would participants pay for a piece of the movie or pay for temporary privilege to view it?
Well, so I think economic structures have to meet what's really going on in the environment. And so the production of something like a feature length film is an extremely laborious process, laborious, intensive, creative process where you're making art first and foremost, which is like not like making other stuff, right? So creating art is very different than manufacturing, for example, like a lot of stuff. And so art is fundamentally different. And many times, all of the work and time that humans do to be able to produce that art started decades before. Like it's you look at any amazing art piece, and there's components and influences either in the artists themselves, or like in the piece they wanted to make, or like how it remixes other pieces, that is really kind of like a thread interwoven into a tapestry that's been going for decades or many centuries in some cases, right? And so that is like, you have to account for that in the economic model for art production. And so what that means is, like, when you approach kind of creating an NFT for a feature length film, you have to think of like being able to reward all of the people and all the participants that created that. So think of like creating the royalty network and the attribution network related to that film. So instead of like there being like one single artist, the artist of that NFT is really kind of like this whole larger collective and this network of participants, like all the different, and the film industry has like this very robust, good way of doing this already in terms of attributing all the credits, and you can see who worked on what part and so on. Like they even care about this so much, rightly so, that they put it at the end of every piece, right? So at the end of every film, you have the credits roll, and like that's the credit attribution and who worked on this piece. And so you can just take the credits right there and like weave, that same kind of structure, weave that into an NFT royalty flow, and have like some distribution of rewards that kind of flow out of the NFT. And then separately, I think you do need to have IP rights work differently there. I think the buyers of NFTs there need to get the IP for what happens when you view the movie, or when can you show it, and so on, and create a structure that is like permissive and open, where anybody, potentially anybody can like watch this thing, but there's some payment flows that go back to all the people that created on these things, or if you charge in a kind of like a token gated sort of way, make sure that all of those payments kind of like flow through that royalty graph. So all of that stuff is like now buildable. It's just like nobody has done it yet. So if you're interested in that, like, go make it.
Next question from Anonymous. In terms of computation over data, is there support for machine learning models and AI applications out of the box?
So that's definitely something that different teams are going to have to work on. So I think the goal is to try and fit whatever's out there already. So the ML community has produced amazing software in terms of how do you deal with all of the existing structures, and how do you build the right models and so on. So in many cases, you can just plug in Web3 infrastructure into the same software. In some cases, you'll have to like write new software, like new adapters and so on. And in some cases, you might have to like write whole new pipeline, like ML pipeline computing software to kind of like orchestrate the computation over a network like this. The biggest problem there is probably going to be positioning. So if you have like some machine learning data set and some model and some computation that you want to run over it, like making sure that your computation and the data are like in the same place, and that you're not like hopping across like large latency lengths and so on. That's what maybe there's a big opening for somebody to go work on that right now. And so doing all the ML pipelines work now for IPFS and Filecoin might be like well positioned to then ship, towards the end of next year or like the year after. And I think at that point, like that's going to be like in super well timed to be able to kind of do massive scale ML computation over Web3 stuff. And one of the really cool things here is that using Web3 hard cryptography stuff, we can make much better, much more ethical uses of ML, where you have verifiable guarantees about how the things are being used, like where classification and so on can be steered by ethics policies that are applied direct on top of the models, and you get like verifiable proof that like that actually happened, that nobody ran some other program, that they only got access to be able to run the computation over that data that was according to the policy, and like that's something like super amazing and an unfair advantage over the Web2 clouds. And so press into that, like drag the whole world into a much better, more higher performance, higher quality, cheaper, more values oriented ML system by leaning into the advantages that Web3 has. Right?
Question. With retrieval markets in place, how would the payment for this happen? Would a client need a file to retrieve a movie, for instance?
So there's two basic, I mean, there's a lot of different models for file distribution, but there's two major ones. One is where the publisher pays, and one is where the retriever pays. So many publishers are interested in you looking at their stuff. So like a website or a video or something like that. So the kind of like standard process is that publishers tend to pay for that distribution model. In other cases, when the publishers put out the data, but like clients, maybe it's like really big. This usually maps to the size of the data. Once you start hitting terabytes, then you want the clients to pay for the retrieval, and then in that case, you might pay Filecoin. So the retrieval markets are like exploring both both ends of that spectrum and kind of like all the spots in between, and some other interesting models that people have come up with around economic flows for retrieval. And so you want to enable kind of like both structures. The one that's more popular right now is just like the publisher's pay. Like so think of like the standard CDN style setting where like you have some content or like some lists of content, and you want the CDN to spread that out over the world, and to then serve it from there. And so like that should work, and like the publisher should pay in Filecoin.
Hey, that's the end of those questions, but you had an amazing roadmap for 2022. What are you most excited about?
Really, I think like probably using public funding good structures to make new computation networks that can do like large scale computation to run a metaverse environment like that. Like, it's kind of like the three pieces together. So that's what I think. Like maybe work on each one of these things individually first, and then piece them together.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was amazing.